Welcome to Duchenne Connections, the podcast where lived experience meets real conversation. Hosted by Michelle Pomeroy and Donna Anderton, we explore the Duchenne journey through honest stories, shared experiences, and the connections that bring our community together. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we record this podcast. Duchenne Connections is recorded across Kaurna country in South Australia and Wurundjeri country in Victoria. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's episode of Duchenne Connections. This is a bit exciting for us. We've managed to get this up and running, and this is where lived experience meets real life conversation. I'm Michelle Pomeroy.
And I'm Donna Anderton.
And today's episode is going to be around the start of the journey. And the last episode we talked about what the start of the journey and diagnosis was like for me. And so today we're going to explore Cooper's diagnosis. So Cooper's now 18, is that
18?
Right, Donna? Yeah.
Yep.
So we're going to ask Donna to start sharing with us what the journey was like for you.
Well, my journey was somewhat different to your story with Jack. A lot of the emotion is the same as we've sort of discussed in the last episode, but everyone's journey is unique and different. So for Cooper and our journey, it started with, we already had Mitchell. Mitchell was 19 months older, and then we had Cooper, and I noticed probably at Mother's Group, I remember distinctly the conversation we had about, you've got to make sure that they're walking by 18 months. And that stuck with me, and I was always like, why? I don't understand. Why is that something significant we have to be concerned of anyway? Just let that go and continued on. But I did start to notice that Cooper seemed to always wanted to be picked up around right through his little toddler life before we knew, but he always wanted to be picked up. He wouldn't pick up his toys after himself. We nicknamed him the lazy child. But it was about...
Yeah. I was thinking even like, how is pregnancy for you? Like so Cooper was like your second pregnancy.
Yeah.
So you've got all those comparisons. You've got all those comparisons, like you were saying, those kind of already things in your mind around when he should be walking. And what was the difference was there much between the difference between a pregnancy with Mitchell and a pregnancy with Cooper? And did you feel different? Like, I don't know. Like,
I think with Mitchell, of course, I'm a big advocate of you don't know what you don't know. So everything's new and everything's just new, and every little thing that happens, you look. But when you have your second and so close to the first, you're so exhausted. You don't really notice anything significantly different because you're just trying to get through a day with a toddler climbing over you all the time and wanting you. And so I do remember, so Mitchell was born by cesarean. And following that, it was recommended that the second child be born by cesarean. We always knew the sex of our children because that was just exciting, something to plan around and to be able to organise. And then when he was born 10 days early because he was a planned cesarean. And I just remember looking at him and thinking, man, you're completely different to your brother. Like, this one was a little blonde-haired, little tiny cute thing, and I'm like, wow, me with such dark hair. How did I get such a good looking little baby? But he was always really quiet. And he was probably the best out of the three of my children as a baby. He went to sleep, he ate, he didn't really make a fuss. And I thought, oh, out of the three, he's the one that slept the best, and he's, But going to mother's group and looking, because of course you went to your initial mother's group with your firstborns, and we continued on to a play group, and so we had our initial group, but then we had the little siblings that were coming along as well at the same time, and of course there's a broader group for comparison, if that makes sense.
But do you remember when you noticed differences, like from the other kids? We talked about sort of me not noticing those things for a long time in the journey, but when for you, because you got that comparison, you'd got Mitchell, so how early on do you think that you sort of noticed that there was a difference in Cooper?
I think I noticed where at mother's group we discussed, you got to make sure they're walking by 18 months, and it was 19 months and Cooper started walking. So I went, just outside, that's all right, he's good. It's only 1 month. Like, really, who's going to sit there with a calendar and go, okay, there's a problem now? So it was about 19 months he was walking, but it was probably 6 months after that, maybe about 12 months after that. He was about 2.5, and I remember saying he just wants to be picked up all the time, and he just slept, and he just seemed tired all the time. And at 2.5, I'd watch him run around the house. When I say run around, walk fast, walk, and then he just got frustrated that he had a little tricycle and he couldn't pedal the tricycle. And I remember thinking, we live in a really hilly area. There's not really many flat places to ride a bike. But it got to the 2.5 or the 3-year-old health check. I think it was a 3-year-old health check. And I took him to the maternal child health nurse and I said, listen, I'm a bit concerned about his legs. He just doesn't seem very strong. And she put down a ball and she said, can you kick the ball? And of course, Cooper just kicked the ball, and she goes, he can kick a ball across the room. So then I thought, okay. And I remember then about 6 months later, still being concerned, still seeing that he wanted to be picked up, still seeing that he slept a lot. So he'd sleep a good 12 hours at night, 13 hours. And he was the only toddler that I knew of that would put himself to bed in the afternoon for a 2-hour nap.
And when your kids are napping, you've got two, it's like, yahoo, they're having a sleep.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, that would have been really nice. But what did frustration look like for Cooper? Because, it's really great that he was sleeping, and that probably gave you a bit of breathing space. But, when Cooper did get frustrated, what did that look like?
Well, it wasn't really, we didn't see any behavioural concerns as such.
Did he get upset though? Like, was he emotional?
Yes, he would get upset. He would be whiny and just pick me up. And I'm like, you're 2.5. Like, not that you wouldn't pick him up, but it was a multiple times a day he would want to be picked up. And I would just be like, okay, I'll pick you up. And he was always on my hip and walking around. I'd put him down. He goes, no, up. And I'd pick him up. So it was this, and I didn't really see it anything more than just he wanted to cuddle mum.
Yeah.
But it was at the 3.5-year-old check when I took him back and I said, look, I'm really concerned. And they said, no, he's fine. And I went, okay. But I knew in my gut something was not right. I knew there was just something. And I said to Matt,
I'm not sure that kicking a ball across a room is really Oh, good measure.
He couldn't run. He couldn't climb. It was actually at kinder. That's right. If I think that, yeah, he was actually at kinder, and I went to pick him up from kinder, and I just had my third. So I just had Reese. She was probably 8 months old. And I remember picking him up from kinder early, and the kinder teacher said, "Have you got a second?" And she called me over and she said, "I'm a little bit concerned about Cooper." And I said, "Okay." I said, "What are your concerns?" And she said, "Well, when everyone's playing outside, he sits in the sandpit on his own." And I immediately, being a teacher, said, "Do you suspect something like autism, that he's wanting to not interact with others?" And I was just shooting at what she could be hinting at. I hadn't noticed anything like that, but in a social setting, that's where you would pick up on these things. And so she said, "No." She said, "But what I noticed is when we were using the balance beam, he always wants someone to hold his hand, and he won't walk one foot in front of the other. He shuffles side to side and has someone holding on to him." And I went, "Oh, that's okay." She said, "Yeah, it would be worth just maybe checking it out." So I made an appointment. No. At this stage, I was like, okay. And we were about to go on a family weekend holiday down to Port Arlington, near Geelong in Victoria. And out the front of the caravan park, it was very flat. And I said to Coop, who was then concerned that he still couldn't pedal a tricycle or a bicycle, and I said, "We're going to take your bike down there. We're going to set you up. It'll be flat. We will get you riding a bike." And I remember taking him out, and he said, "Mum, let's go." And I said, "Okay." So we went out to the asphalt driveway in front of the caravan, and I put him on the tricycle. And as you do, I remember pushing from behind and saying, "Pedal, pedal." And he would pedal. And then as I let go, his feet would just stop. And I was like, "Keep going." He goes, "I can't." And I said, "Okay, no worries. We'll try again later." And I remember putting him to bed that night, and I remember saying to Matt, "I'm going to take him to the doctors." And me, the family joke in my family is that Donna's, so far off being an expert on everything. So in my head, I thought, hip dysplasia. I think he's probably got a problem. He just needs physio, and then he'll ride his bike. He'll be fine. Matt, I'm going to take him to the GP.
Yeah, and like that pedaling. Who was there anyone else who kind of noticed or raised concerns for you? Like, was it just kind of you and the kindy that had really noticed it? Had Matt
Yeah.
noticed anything, Cooper's dad?
I don't remember. But he was very happy to support me just looking into it, because he wanted his son to ride a bike too, and if there was something he needed a bit of physio, that's what we'd do. And unfortunately, at 3.5, I'd told Cooper that. I said, "Don't worry, mate, we might just need to go to the physio, and they'll strengthen your muscles, and then you'll be fine. You'll be able to ride a bike." And I remember saying that to him. And I took him to the GP, and the GP had seen him before, and I had mentioned something, and he'd said to me, "Don't compare him to Mitchell. They're two different kids. They'll develop at their own time." And I said, "Okay." But when I took him back this time, he had a student teacher with him. A student, not teacher, sorry. Teacher and me. A student doctor with him. And I said to him, "Please humour me. Could you actually feel his legs? Could you actually look at him? I'm concerned that there's a problem. He can't pedal his bike. He can't do anything. He couldn't run, and he couldn't jump at this stage." So he had a look, and he said, "Oh," and I did say, "Could you please order me a double hip X-ray to check for hip dysplasia?" So I was telling the doctor what to do. And my gorgeous GP doctor said, "Yep, let's do that." So he said, "Go across now, have the X-ray, come back. If there's nothing wrong," he said, "I will send you to a paediatrician." So we had a look at the X-ray, all clear, and I was to make an appointment with this paediatrician. I remember the day that I went to the paediatrician, and my mum had come up to mind the kids because Matt and I were going to see one of the shows. One of the shows in the theatre in the city. So Mum was coming up to mind the kids. I think it was Rock of Ages. And so she was with me and she looked after the other two kids while I took Cooper into the appointment with the paediatrician. And he was an older gentleman. He'd been, had been a paediatrician for many decades, I think. And he looked at Cooper and his wrists, I remember Cooper's wrists were so tiny, so tiny. And the paediatrician looked at him and looked at his legs and felt his little muscly calves. And then he said to Cooper, I want you to sit on the floor for me. And Cooper sat on the floor. He said, I want you to stand up. And he crawled over to the seat and he pushed his hands on the chair nearby and then he stood up.
How old was Cooper at this stage?
3.5.
Yeah, so 3.5.
And then the doctor moved the chair out of the way and he said, I'd like you to stand up again. And Cooper did the classic, as we know now, Gower's manoeuvre, where they walk their hands up their legs to stand up because they don't have enough strength in their legs to do it. And he looked at Cooper and said, okay, take a seat, Mum. And I sat down. I probably should backtrack a little bit because prior to this, I had Googled. So Google had come in and I'd looked at weak muscles, weak legs. I'd Googled and Googled, but I'd Googled to the point that I had previously found that the extent of weak legs could lead to a muscular dystrophy. And what was common in young boys was Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And the byline next to it was would need a wheelchair by the age of 9. And as a mum who's Googling prior to going to the paediatrician, looked at that and went, okay, now you've gone too far. Now you're being ridiculous. Shut the screen, turn it off. You're being silly, right? You just need some physio.
Was this the first time you'd seen the paediatrician as well? So this is the first appointment with the paediatrician.
First appointment.
They're asking him to do this stuff, and clearly the paediatrician had a fairly good mindset on what he thought it was.
Yeah.
And then he's asked you to sit down.
He said, have a seat.
You're having flashbacks around you, Googling.
Yep. And Cooper was happily playing on the floor with some toys. And he said his mannerism, I remember he linked his hands in front of him. He leaned across the table and he said, I think it's a muscular dystrophy. I think it's Duchenne. Mm-hmm. And I said, is that the one with a wheelchair when you're aged 9? And he said, yes. And I went, okay, yep. And I remember this. I didn't have the agony of, like you, constant medical investigations. I just had someone sitting across the table saying, I think it's this. I have a script for a blood test. I need you to go right now. By this time it was 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And I said, are you ruling out this? He said, no, this is to confirm what I believe it is. He goes, I have not seen a case in 20 years, but I feel that this is what he has. And I remember saying, okay, so I need to get a blood test right now. He goes, yes. Okay. So I remember, and the blood test was for, what I know now, a CK, to measure the CK. And it was to get it done now and he'd be able to give me a result the next day. How vastly different our stories are in that respect.
Just in a couple of years, like just how things turned. And I think that CK was a very, it's a big marker. So
it is. And so I remember meeting Mum on the street who was pushing the pusher with Grace and Mitchell. And she goes, how did you go? And I said, yep, we have to go and get a blood test. She goes, oh, okay. And I said, he thinks it's Duchenne muscular dystrophy. She goes, do you mean it's the blood test is to rule it out? No, Mum, the blood test is to confirm. And then I remember quickly going, where do I go for a blood test at 4 p.m. in the afternoon with a 3.5-year-old? And I remember pulling up. I was driving, and at the same time I'm on my mobile phone through the car calling Matt, who was driving home from work. And I remember saying I'm heading to, it was a local shopping centre for us, where there was a medical surgery and a pathology there. I said, I'm heading there. He goes, I'm nearly there. I'll meet you in the car park. And I said, okay. He goes, do you know what's happening? I said, yes, I'll tell you when, because I had all 3 kids and Mum in the car. I'll let you know when I get to the car park. And I remember pulling up the car in the car spot, and I remember exiting the car and leaving everybody in the car and running over to Matt, who got out of the car. And I said, he thinks it's a muscular dystrophy and we need to get him a blood test right now. So I remember we got Cooper out of the car and Matt and I went in. Cooper was quite unique with blood tests. He needed one at 18 months for allergies. And they were very nervous about doing it without a second nurse. And I said, I'll help you get the blood. Like, I'll help hold him. And Cooper has always just put his hand out and watched the needle go in and laughed, which astounds me. He just laughs. And then they pull it out and they go, geez, he's so brave. So even though I was nervous about getting this done, I knew he would be able to handle it.
And at this stage, you're still confirming. There's still that element of they've brought this up, they've talked to you about this, but I'd imagine that there's still that kind of tiny bit of hope almost that they could be wrong.
I think I felt,
or did you felt like, no, this is where we're going?
I think I felt I can do something about this.
Yeah,
I can do so. I finally can make a plan. I can do something about this. There'll be help. I felt there would be help. Once we get this confirmation, they'll give me help. Yeah, and I remember going to the pathology and they said, we won't touch a boy that young at this time of the day. Nope, sorry. So then there was panic because I needed to get this test tonight because it was Thursday night. So I couldn't get it tomorrow. I wouldn't have found out till the Monday.
And you've got Matt there and you got your mum with the kids. How did that feel like?
I just felt I needed to get it done. So we went to the local hospital. I just got to the nearby hospital, and we walked in and they said, yep, we'll do it for you now. I said, thank you. And they took the blood. And then I remember just driving home and I felt my mum and my kids were in the car, but Matt was in the car in front, and I just wanted, it's that bit where you rely on your partner. The moment you realise you rely on him so much that the distance in the cars was affecting me because I just needed him in the car. So I remember going home, and as I'm driving home, I'm saying to Mum, you know what? This is going to be fine. If he's going to be in a wheelchair, he's going to be the best Paralympian you've ever met. He's going to be just awesome. He's just going to do wheelchair Olympics, and we're moving the goalposts, Mum. That's what we're doing. A bit like Italy to Holland.
When you got home that night, and you were waiting overnight, did you go back onto Google? Did you look into any more, or were you kind of in that state of fight, flight, freeze? I don't know. Like, did you feel the need to get more info?
It wasn't until we got home. And so Matt and I still had tickets to this show.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Do we go? Don't we go? What do we do? We've got the tickets. We decided to go to the show. Probably one of the worst mistakes we ever made. But I remember once I was home, and it had not even entered my head. Not once. And I was in shock when Matt turned to me and said, what's the life expectancy? And I went, what are you talking about? And I remember Googling to discredit the question. And I remember putting in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, life expectancy. And when I hit enter, it had, at the time, late teens, early 20s. And I remember, most people that know me, I can be quite dramatic. I can have a bit of a laugh at myself. But it was the one time that my legs went from under me and I hit the ground with Matt behind me just catching me because I just moved the goalpost. He was going to be a Paralympian. There was no talk of life expectancy. And why would Matt say that? Like, he had every right to say that. He was correct. And it was the split second when our world just collapsed in that moment, because we weren't discrediting Duchenne muscular dystrophy. We were seeking confirmation. And then I felt awful.
And being in a wheelchair is one thing, but the life expectancy is another. It's a whole,
yeah.
you know,
And being in a wheelchair, I think the term, and my naivety back then, being in a wheelchair just meant you pushed yourself along in a manual wheelchair. That's what I thought. And just self-propel yourself. That's what you do. That's what you see on the TV. That's just what happens.
Wheelchair basketball, you know.
Wheelchair
here
basketball.
We come.
Yep. He would love it. We went to the theatre that night, and now, thank God I always buy cheap tickets. We were in the back row. And I remember at intermission, everyone got up and walked out to go and get something to eat in the toilet. And Matt and I had sat through the full first half holding each other's hand and both crying. And we couldn't even enjoy what we were just both crying at the back, and people walking out going, I could probably see them shaking their heads going, it's like, why are these two crying? It's a good musical.
Yeah, it's not
if you don't like it, go home. But we just couldn't get past what we were confronted with in that moment.
And waiting for that confirmation the next morning. So you already know what you're heading towards. It's, you know, you now know what's coming.
Yeah.
And or think that you know what's coming, you know, like.
Yeah. And I think we had to take the boys to swimming lessons, and they finished at 11:30, and then I raced home and I was just waiting for the phone. I'm waiting for the phone, and he was going to ring at 12 o'clock. He said he'd ring at 12. And the phone rang on the 16th of June, 2011 at 12:30 p.m. So I'll know the date and the time.
Was there any doubt at all in your mind that this wasn't going to be DMD? In your mind, were you, this is it, it's definitely DMD?
I think I didn't want it to be once I knew, but I think I knew it was. I think it just ticked all those boxes. And I feel like I needed the answer. I just needed the yes or no. I knew it was going to be yes. What I didn't know was how confirming it would be when the phone rang at 12:30 that day, and the pediatrician answered. He goes, I have the test results. And I said, yes. He goes, Cooper's CK level is sitting at 30,138. And I said, is that good? Because I didn't know what that meant. He said it should be below 180. And I said, what does that mean? He means I'm confirming the diagnosis of a muscular dystrophy. He said, but you will need to come back and see me on Monday morning. I've cleared a spot for you, and you will need to come in at this time. Before we got, they were pretty sure it was Duchenne. They just needed genetic confirmation. But the week previous to that, on June 11th, my sister had just gotten married, and I was bridesmaid in her wedding. But at the time, she was 7 months pregnant, and I was told by the pediatrician that there is a genetic factor in this, that I would need to be tested. I would be given a blood script on Monday for myself and Cooper to be tested. And I explained that my sister is pregnant, and he said, you will probably need to have the conversation with her. When you are thrown into a total lack of control, you control what you can. I see it in kids all the time. I see it in just human nature. When we lose control, we control what we can. Sometimes that has good, sometimes it's not good. And I knew for my sister, who was at home pregnant, that I didn't want to shatter her world. She'd only just got married, but at the same time, I couldn't not be honest with her. So if I told her I just said to Matt, I need to go and see her. I need to go. And so the Saturday after the Friday, I think we spent the whole weekend in a cave. It felt like we were just locked away, and the kids did whatever they wanted, and we were just
this diagnosis just had an impact you. And this was now going to impact the other females in your family. This was going to impact, so this bombshells hit you. And now it's not just you. I mean, I came from a family full of males, and it was like, nah, you're all boys in your family. My mum had 4 brothers. I had 2 brothers. It was like, but for you, you've got this diagnosis, and now this is something that could be affecting your sister's unborn child.
Yeah.
And then you're processing what's going on, and I guess you just said you were in a cave, but how how did you cope with that over that weekend till the Monday before you were seeing the doctor again?
I think I spent Friday on the internet, as you do, where I'd read the genetic components more in depth. So I knew from the limited knowledge back then in 2011 that there was a possibility it affected my sister, my mum, my 2 maternal aunties, and possibly I did the math to realise that my male cousins didn't have it because they were unaffected and they were adults. But I knew that one of my aunties had a daughter and who hadn't had children yet. So I knew that there was a possibility of these people being affected. And although I didn't go and announce it to the whole entire family all at once, I felt the most urgent thing I could do and control was tell my sister. So I remember it was the first Saturday after they'd been married, and I made up a lie to say to her, I'm just at a friend's having a coffee nearby, because she lived a distance away. Are you home? Can I pop in for a cuppa on the way? And she said, yeah, I'm home. Come over. Because if I said I'm coming over from my house, she'll go, what's wrong? And I couldn't tell her over the phone. I needed to tell her in person. So I remember Matt stayed with the kids and I drove over and I delivered the news to her. And she was great. She was more concerned with Cooper. But knowing my sister, and I love her dearly, I must have given her a huge blow. So the Sunday morning, she took herself to the local hospital where she was going to be having her baby. And she walked into the emergency department and said, this is what's happening in my family. I need you to test me for this. And they said, you'll need to come back tomorrow and see the genetic counsellor. You can't just have your blood taken. And of course, we had no idea about genetic counsellors at that time because we just thought, well, you found out from this blood test does she need to go and have a blood test? So then I came home, and I think Matt and I we just didn't move for the weekend. The kids did whatever they wanted. We just were
So
trying to
that,
process.
talking to your sister, was that done on that weekend, that you were waiting to see the doctor to confirm diagnosis? So that was huge to do that. Like, that's, that, I think it's shows people the impact of a diagnosis when there's a high number of females within the family, or not even a high level of females in the family.
Yeah.
That, this this diagnosis impacts the wider family as well. And look,
And
we know people. We know many families where sisters are affected, and
Yeah.
so there are more children within the family that are diagnosed. So,
And
yeah,
we, like, looking back, I probably could have done it differently. I probably should have waited. But it was pretty certain it was a muscular dystrophy, and most muscular dystrophies, from what I could read. So it was just having that control over something I could control. Not that I wanted to ruin her life or ruin her, dreamy honeymoon period after she got married. I just knew she was 7 months pregnant and needed to know.
yeah,
And I felt a sense of responsibility, knowing there is a possibility I could have this and have passed it on. So I remember Monday morning, or the Monday appointment, we went, he gave us blood scripts, he apologised, he felt bad for us and felt bad for Cooper. But he had made contact with the Children's Hospital in Melbourne and said, there's an appointment already, I've pulled some strings, there's an appointment for you next week to see one of the head neurologists there.
I remember, Donna, in the previous podcast where I talked about a doctor that was very helpful, and he didn't give us the diagnosis. He was the gastroenterologist who said he would find out what was going on. And I remember getting the same phone call for him to say, I'm really sorry that this is the diagnosis.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that we found out what's going on. And, I think that kind of tells you the severity of a diagnosis when the doctors are calling up and apologising.
And pulling strings. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember calling the GP. I just needed him to know. I just said, could I please speak to the GP? I need to tell him something. And he must have had notification from the paediatrician, because he goes, yes, put her on the phone. Like, he was apologetic. I remember him saying, this is just shit. I can't believe this, Donna. And I'd been seeing him since Matt and I got together. So we had this, great relationship. But what happened next? So what happened was, we went to the appointment at the Children's Hospital. Of course, a 3.5-year-old doesn't want to go. But I said, you can have an ice cream at the Macca's down the bottom when we finish. Okay, I'll come. And we went to the appointment at the old Children's Hospital, and we met with the neurologist, and she said to us, we actually don't have the results of your genetic blood test yet, so we can't really do anything. What we'll do is make another appointment for you to come back. And I said, okay. I said, now my sister's pregnant and she's had testing done at the Mercy Hospital, another nearby hospital. She said, yep, that's fine. So because we hadn't had genetic confirmation, we were to wait. When I left the appointment at about 5:30 that evening, she'd given me her card with her email address on it. And I went downstairs to the Macca's, and Matt was organising Cooper's ice cream when my phone rang, and it was my sister. I think the appointment must have been 2 weeks after we'd met with the paediatrician on the Monday, because my sister had met the genetic counsellor. They had taken her blood and she was waiting on results. So when I came out of the appointment and I'm at the bottom of the Children's Hospital at the McDonald's, Cooper's getting an ice cream, and my sister's ringing, and I answer the phone. She goes, they've said that I don't have what Cooper has. He has a deletion of exon, she said, exon 21, and I don't have it, which means I don't have what Cooper's got. And there was instant relief. I was just, okay. But in that same sentence, it confirmed that Cooper had it.
Yeah.
So my sister had told me that Cooper had it. When I emailed the neurologist and said, I've just received information from my sister that she does not have the same exon deletion as Cooper has. And then I got a phone call the following day from the neurologist saying, could you please come straight back in? And I said,
Donna,
okay.
how did it feel? How did it feel kind of getting that information through your sister that, that yes, this was it. And she's telling you, I mean, you now know what an exon is, right? But at the time, you wouldn't have known that,
No, I didn't know.
She's given you this information. Two questions on that. How did it feel for you? And then I want to know a little bit about how did it feel around the other siblings, but let's stay with your sister for now and how it felt, getting that information from her, and then you're emailing the neurologist to tell them that
So I'm emailing the neurologist to say it's not exon deletion 21 as my sister has told me that Cooper has. I was writing the email as a matter of fact. There you go. Here's the information. When we have the next appointment, we can discuss. I had sent the email as an informative piece just to let them know. I didn't realise that her hospital had broken protocol because she wasn't to know until patient 0 was told. So the reason I was getting called back into the hospital was they were severely apologising and hoping that I wouldn't press charge or, sue anyone. And I'm like, I'm not in. That was the least important thing in my mind. I didn't care. I just wanted to help my son. I just knew that knowing the diagnosis meant we could get help now. There's help.
Yeah.
What are we doing?
There's a treatment, right?
There's a treatment.
Where do we go from here to make this better?
To go in and go, there's no treatment. But I still didn't know at the time whether I was a carrier or not.
And
we know what carriers
how did your rest of your family, obviously there's just your sister and, your mum and, the siblings, like, how did everyone else feel? Like I mean, I felt a little bit cocooned in some respects in that the journey was so harsh. I was just kind of in this bubble a little bit of just trying to work it all out. But I only had Jack. For you had the other kids and, your sister.
Yeah.
And potentially your mum. It's how was everyone coping?
I remember Matt was calling his family and letting them know over the weekend, just that first weekend, just this is what we could be possibly dealing with for Cooper. Mum had already had an inkling. My mum, I think we all just handle things differently, and the older I get, the more I realise that we're all different and we handle things differently. And I know for my mum, she struggles to just comprehend that negative of anything. She doesn't, it's very hard for her. So to a degree, I feel that she just sort of, yep, no, it'll all be fine. It'll all be good.
But she's got 2 children. This isn't just you. She's got, and we know that double grief, man. There's grief for you and then grief for her other daughter and her own grief.
Yeah. So getting the news that Debbie didn't have it was a big relief. But for me, I was still concerned about my cousin. and my aunties, and because they were getting old, and I knew enough through the genetic counsellor to, that's probably after. I just know that everyone was very supportive, but everyone was distraught because what they saw was just Cooper, a regular kid. They didn't really see the struggling on the playground. They didn't see that. They saw me having to pick him up all the time, and they just thought it was cute. So for them, it sort of came out of nowhere. For them, it was like, it's just Cooper. And then suddenly Cooper's got this life-limiting condition that will fully affect his lives and everyone else's. So
what do you think Cooper knew at this stage? Like, what do you think, had he been with you as part of those conversations, or had he been out of the
yeah,
room?
but he was there, but at 3.5, nearly 4, they don't take it in. He didn't really, he just played with the toys. He just getting an ice cream. He really didn't, from what I can see, he really didn't register anything. It was hard those initial weeks just to stay, because Mitchell was 5, Cooper's 3.5. Reese wasn't even 1. It was the day she turned 1, a couple of weeks later, that the genetic counsellor called me in to say, we have the results of your DNA and you actually have the same deletion as Cooper. And then the genetic counsellor says to me, how do you feel about that? And I'm like, well, it was going to be unfair for him if he got it as a spontaneous mutation. But if I gave it to him, at least I know where it came from. And then she put the box of tissues in front of me like she expected me to cry. So at that stage, when you don't have, you're trying to keep it together, like I am now. When you're trying to keep it together, but someone puts a box of tissues in front of you, you don't even have you don't even have the thought process to rationalize what you feel. You just do what's expected. So I just grabbed a tissue and started crying, even though I didn't really, maybe that's just what's next, because I didn't have the next step in my head.
No.
And I remember going to pick up Reese from my mother-in-law's after that, going, it's your birthday. We have to be happy for Reese. It's her first birthday.
And
so
I think that whole carrier status stuff, and I think we should explore this in more detail, Donna.
Yeah.
But, I feel like, don't be sorry. I think it's, I think that the whole carrier stuff is, that was highly exposed in your family. That was a lot to think about and take in. For my journey, it was very different because I didn't have all those other people that it could have affected.
Yeah.
And you had Mitchell, and I'm guessing that when you looked at Mitchell, you kind of didn't see those same things, so you perhaps wasn't so worried about Mitchell.
But a month later, I called the genetic counsellor. Then a month later, I'm on the phone. I'm like, panicked. What about Mitchell? And she said, can he jump? Yep. Is he running? Yep. Is he kicking footies and kicking balls? Yep. He's fine. Oh, okay. Like, because I wasn't sure, would it show up later for him? I was just, do I need to get him tested? Like, I was in a panic. And it took a month for me to panic about that. And then I look at Reese and I went, does she have to deal with this? But then I remember, this might be for another episode, but I remember having to work out how I felt about it all. So I remember this was my bit of a mantra to people. Oh, people would go, I'm so sorry. Oh, please don't feel bad. Don't feel guilty. And I'd say, I don't feel guilty. I feel responsible. I didn't do it deliberately. I didn't know I had the condition and then go and have my children. I had my 3 children and then I learnt about it. So I don't feel guilty, but I feel responsible that I'm there to do everything that Cooper needs. Which, may I add, contributes to carer burnout later in life. But that's for another episode.
That is for another episode. I do want to just touch on another thing for you guys, and I want to touch on diagnosis, because you guys went through this diagnosis with Cooper, and you went through a whole lot in one go, because you kind of got the diagnosis, but then you also had to do all the genetics, and you'd already got children. The effects could then flow on to the rest of your family. But I want to talk about a little bit later on when a second diagnosis came for you in terms of Mitchell. And we will go into more detail in another episode of this one too. But Mitchell also, how old was Mitchell when he had a diagnosis of something different? But
it was probably 12 months later where I discovered a lump on the side of Mitchell's neck. And we had that investigated for 6 months, where we were told it was just a chronically large lymph node. So we were told not to touch it, not to play with it, and it should go away. So after 9 months, where we humoured him by saying, you've got so many brains, mate, they're just coming out your neck as well. Like, don't worry about it. Or, there's your second. Like, it was quite substantial. So we used to just make light of it because we were told it was innocent. And then it was probably 9 months after we first found it that I had it reinvestigated, and they still said it looked innocent. And they said maybe you should go to the children's hospital nearby to speak to the pediatric surgeons just to discuss what to do about it. Everything was very low-key, very relaxed. It's just chronically large lymph node. So then we went to the pediatricians and the pediatric surgeons at Monash Children's, and they said, look, it's just chronically large. You could leave it in or take it out. What would you like to do? And I, by then, didn't trust myself to make the right decision, because I thought maybe I was being an alarmist and maybe I would go the dramatic route and think it's something. So I remember looking at Matt, and Matt made the decision and said, just take it out. So then we had to wait because it wasn't urgent. We waited about 4 months, and then it's probably October 2013. So Coop was diagnosed in the June of 2011. We'd found the lump in the August 2012. So October 2013, they removed the lump and in surgery. And then we had to go back next week for the pathology results. I remember taking Reese, who just wanted chippies, and I said, as soon as we go into this appointment, we're going to go out, get chippies at Macca's and go and pick up Cooper from school. And then we went back to pathology, and they announced that Mitchell's lump was cancerous, and there was an 80% chance of being cured in 5 years. And I looked at her, because my cousin had just passed away in Darwin the weekend before from leukemia, and he was 47. And I remember looking at her and saying, you're going to lie to me and you're going to say it's 100% curable, because I also have a son at home with muscular dystrophy, and there's no option. That's just what you're going to say for me to walk out of this room. And she said, can't go home until you have some further tests. And I remember ringing my girlfriend, who I said, could you please pick up Cooper from school, because I'm at the hospital and I can't leave until Mitchell had some further tests. And then I said, she goes, I'll swing past and pick up Reese. I said, that would be great. Could you get us some chippies? Which she did. And then
Don't forget the chips.
Don't forget the chips, because I promised her chips. And then I remember for the second time having to ring my husband and tell him over the phone that there was something wrong. And yeah.
I really want to talk about this more. Yeah. I want to just share one little beautiful...
He's fine, by the way. He's all good now. Sorry, probably should do that, not leave that hanging.
I do want to say that I've got a most famous saying from Reese, where when asked about her two brothers, and asked how they were going, and she said, well, we've got some treatment for Mitchell, but we're still working on Coops. And makes me emotional just saying that. But as a sibling, I always stuck with me with Reese, that this beautiful little person having this big, two big things to deal with along with you guys. So yeah, that always stuck with me, that she said.
She used to call them my boys. She'd be this little toddler, my boys. But yeah, they're great. They're great. And I remember, that's right, I remember the neurologist said to me, I just remember saying, how do I explain this? How do I go about telling the kids about this? And she said, just age-appropriate answers to the questions they ask. And that's probably another episode on all the questions I've been asked. And all the work I've done in schools and the questions the kids ask. And it's good. But I think being honest with them from an early age was really helpful. They knew I would always tell them the truth. They knew they always had an answer. They didn't have to be scared or fearful. They knew, just like we did.
I think the difficulty is, and we find this, that if you don't answer kids' questions, they will go off and Google, and you'd much rather answer their questions. Yeah. I've got a final question for you. Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking, can you reflect on that kind of whole diagnosis journey and pick out some key things that you felt did work well, or, where you felt supported? I mean, you said your friend sort of came along and helped with the other kids, and can you share a couple of things that you felt worked well, helped with your diagnosis journey?
Yeah, I'm a talker. Those of you that know me, I'm a talker, and I really I saw the difference in family members across the board, of those that talked and how they coped and those that didn't. And I'm not saying you should all do it a certain way, but I feel just finding people that you can connect to and talk actually has a shared understanding. Like it just helps lighten the load. But I also remember for a while there, people stopped talking to me about their problems. Like my friends, the kids' parents, they stopped talking to me about, problems that they were having with their families or their husbands, or that, just as mums talk about life issues. And then I had to actually explicitly say to people, please don't, because it actually normalizes life, because otherwise you are so consumed with just what's in front of you that it prevents you from it prevents you from coping. It prevents you from having that fidelity in the relationship and the conversation, and to feel valued. Because the one thing, I'm wondering if this is my light bulb moment, the one thing I want people to understand is there is no, and I've said this lots of times to different people, every mother, every father goes to bed with the worries of their children every night, no matter whether they've broken their arm, they have a chronic condition, their parents did, something's happening in their world, their friendships. There's no comparable scale on worry.
Yeah.
So just because my worry for my son at the time was big doesn't mean your worry about not being able to find a yellow t-shirt at Kmart is comparable. Like, you don't compare them. That is your concern, then that's valid.
Yeah. I think everybody has a bad, like
Yes.
everybody's going to face a bad or a
Yep.
dark time.
Mm.
And it doesn't matter what the cause of that is. Everybody's going to have some sort of bad at some point where they're going to have to face that. And
there's no comparable scale.
No, there's no comparable scale. No. It's all relevant,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is relevant.
So maybe then our light bulb moment for this week is that, consider everybody's worries, but also understand that no worry is bigger than another worry, and that the people around you, I mean, we may have people, I'm hoping that we're going to have other family members listening to these podcasts, and I guess other professionals to understand how we do feel and navigate. And I think that that's probably a good takeaway for them, that, and for us, that, sometimes a worry's a worry,
Yeah. Yep. And however you need to process that or get help for that, do it. And if it's talking to a friend and having a cup of tea, like you and I often do over the phone, that's great. If it's going for a walk, connecting with nature, taking time out, using some energy, then do that. Whatever you need to do, but just know it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's our podcast for today. Thank you, Donna, for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
And we look forward to the next episode. This is Duchenne Connections, where lived experience meets real conversation.
Real conversations.
And I'm Michelle Pomeroy.
I'm Donna Anderton.
And we look forward to the next episode.
If today's conversation brought up thoughts, ideas or concerns, we want to acknowledge that while these discussions are informed by lived experience and professional knowledge, every Duchenne journey is different. The things we talk about may not be right for everyone, so we always encourage families to speak with their own support teams, including medical personnel and allied health professionals, about their individual circumstances.